Hi, I'm David Wills and you're watching the TED-IELTS YouTube channel, the place to go for honest, straightforward IELTS advice. You won't find any tricks or shortcuts here, just simple, actionable advice that can help you to prepare for your next IELTS test. Today we're going to talk about IELTS writing and the number of words you should write. Or rather, the number of words you shouldn't write. I know. You probably think you already know the answer to this one. It's 150 words for task 1 and 250 for task 2, right? Well, it's not that simple. And in this video, I'll explain some of the problems with writing much more than that. Specifically, I'm going to give you 3 reasons why you should not write too much. I know you're probably busy, and so if you don't have time to watch the whole video, you can use the chapter titles below to skip to the part that is most relevant for you. However, I do recommend you watch the whole thing if you want the most value. Also, you can turn on the subtitles if you find it hard to understand me, but you might get more benefit if you just listen first and try to understand. You can always go back and watch again with the subtitles on. Before we start the lesson though, I'd like to point out that the ideas in this video are from my book, How to Write the Perfect Essay for IELTS. I actually have several books about IELTS writing, and if you enjoy these videos, you might also enjoy reading the books. Okay, let's begin today's lesson. Regardless of whether you do the IELTS General or Academic test, you will sit a writing exam that lasts for 1 hour, and in that 1 hour you must do 2 tasks. For the General test, that's a letter and an essay. And for the academic test, that's a report and an essay. In both cases, you have to write at least 150 words for task 1 and 250 words for task 2. You might wonder what happens if you write fewer words than that. Well, in the past you would be deducted marks. However, according to ex-IELTS examiner Shelley Cornick, who runs the wonderful website My IELTS Classroom, this rule was done away with in mid-2018. That means there is no longer an immediate deduction of points, but it is still good to not write too few words. The reason for this is simply that you would not have adequately covered the task. Think about it. Could you really describe a complex process diagram in just 120 words? Could you adequately explain the pros and cons of the death penalty in 210 words? Not really. Your answer would most likely have a lack of detail, which means that your score for task achievement or task response would be lower than it would be otherwise had you written 160 or 260 words. You might logically think then that the more you write, the higher your score would be for that part of the marking rubric. Well, there's certainly a little truth to that. An essay of 350 words would probably have a lot more detail, explanation, and examples than one that is just 210 words. So the score for task achievement would probably be higher. Still, this is not really an intelligent approach to essay writing, and I'm going to explain why by giving you 3 reasons to not write too much. For IELTS writing, you are judged on 4 criteria. There's task achievement, coherence and cohesion, lexical resource, and grammatical range and accuracy. Your overall score will be the average of these components. Now, those last 2 tend to be the hardest to get a high score in because they take years and years to learn, and it's really easy to make mistakes that could cap your band at just a band 6. Thus, most people make lots of mistakes here. Essentially, when it comes to vocabulary and grammar, you need to aim for both range and accuracy. Some people fixate on having so-called advanced vocabulary and incorporating a wide range of grammatical structures. Whilst these things are important, it is perhaps more important to avoid making mistakes. In IELTS writing, we ought to be as accurate as possible, and this means you should always strive for error-free sentences. There are many tactics we can pursue in achieving this, and one of them is writing essays of a particular length. Let's say you write an essay of 260 words and you make 10 errors in grammar. Well, logically, if you wrote 390 words, you would make 15 grammatical errors. This is because you have written 50% more, so logically there would be 50% more mistakes. When you consider the fact that each mistake contributes to a slight lowering of your band score, then you will realize why writing more is not such a good idea. Think about the fact that it is not just your score for grammar that declines, but also for vocabulary. A longer essay might also contain more errors in transition and referencing and punctuation, which could affect your score for coherence and cohesion too. And all of these errors could theoretically cause your ideas to be presented in an unclear way, reducing your score for task achievement, which was the marking criteria you thought you would ace by writing a long essay. Ultimately, writing a long essay to get a better score for task achievement in the hopes of balancing out a low score for grammatical range and accuracy is a tactic that seems logical, but which could ultimately backfire. How quickly can you write an essay? This differs wildly from person to person. Some people can easily write a Task 2 essay in 30 minutes, but others take about 50 minutes. For IELTS, it is advised that you spend about 40 minutes on this task, and that includes planning and checking your answer. We'll come back to that later. That's just Task 2. There's also Task 1 to consider, which should take you about 20 minutes to write. If you take too long to write the first essay, it will have a knock-on effect for the second. Importantly, you must finish both essays. Even if they're not perfect, you absolutely have to get them both completed within the 1-hour time limit. You cannot ask for another few minutes to finish your essay. It's against the rules. If the examiners say stop and you're in the middle of a sentence or you have not yet written your conclusion, this means big trouble. It could have a really serious impact on your score because your ideas would be incomplete. Of course, word count can drastically affect the time it takes to write an essay. If you struggle to produce a 260-word essay in 40 minutes, then you definitely shouldn't aim to write an essay that is much longer than that. Instead, it is logical to aim to write a sensible number of words that allows you plenty of time to finish your essay. This number will depend on you. I've known a few students who could easily finish a 330-word essay in 40 minutes, but others who would struggle to do 290 minutes in that time. Make sure that when you practice IELTS writing at home, you set a timer and stick to that. This will help you to prepare for the real test. With practice, you will learn how to write quickly and also get a feel for the amount of time that has elapsed and the number of words that you have written. When I teach my students about IELTS writing, I like to break the whole process down into chunks. It's easy to think of writing an exam as just putting pen to paper or typing on a keyboard, but there's more to it than that. It should go something like this. Spend about 2 minutes analysing the question, 2 minutes thinking of ideas, 3 minutes planning your structure, about 30 minutes actually writing the essay, and maybe 3 minutes checking your answer. Again, this is a personal decision, and you may find that another approach works for you, but generally this is a good idea that works for a lot of people. Importantly, it leaves time at the end for checking your essay for mistakes. I strongly advise that you do this because everyone should be able to find 1 or 2 errors in their own writing. Imagine that you made 5 mistakes in your essay, but managed to correct 2 of them at the end. That would mean you've just made 3 mistakes. This could be the difference between a band 6.5 and a band 7. Of course, if you write too many words, you would be unlikely to have time to check your essay at the end, and you would not be able to find and remove those 2 mistakes. The result would be a lower band score. By the way, if you want to know how to proofread your own IELTS essays, which is a quite difficult thing to do, then you definitely should check out this video. Okay, now let's take an example to understand how all of this works together. This is Paul. He's writing a Task 2 essay. Like many people, he knows his grammar is weak, so he decides to compensate for this by getting a great score for task achievement. This is a valid technique because balancing strengths and weaknesses can help you achieve a good overall score. By writing a long, complicated essay with many ideas, he feels as though he has pushed his score for task achievement up to a band 8 or 9. But of course, the volume of errors has pushed his score for grammatical range and accuracy and lexical resource down to a 5. What's more, he has also made some errors with pronouns, relative clauses, punctuation, and transition words. This means his score for coherence and cohesion drops to just 6. But all of this is weighed out against his amazing score for task achievement, right? Not necessarily. An essay with many mistakes in terms of vocabulary and grammar will be quite hard to understand, and this will make it virtually impossible to get a band 9 for task achievement. In fact, with so many errors, it would be really hard to understand his great ideas, and it is possible that the score could drop even further. This all assumes that he was even able to finish writing the essay. If it was more than 350 words, he might not have managed that. Without a conclusion, his task achievement score would drop even further. Without a few minutes to check for errors, his other scores could continue to drop until his essay was officially a disaster. So what can we learn from all of this? First of all, the obvious thing is that you shouldn't write too much because of those main 3 reasons. 1. You'll make more mistakes. 2. You'll run out of time. And 3. You'll be unable to fix the mistakes that you did make. That leaves us with one big question left. How many words should you write? Well, as I have alluded to a few times, it is a somewhat personal choice. Some people will be able to write 300 words quite easily and others would struggle. Ultimately, you need to find what works best for you. However, you might want to tailor your word count to your present or expected IELTS band score. If you're aiming to score about band 7 but routinely getting about band 6 or 6.5, then maybe you should write 260 to 290 words. This is a nice target that allows sufficient development of ideas, but without becoming too complex or taking too long to write. If you're aiming for band 9 but getting a 7 or 8, then you might benefit from writing a little more. This may seem to contradict what I've said so far, but people at that level will generally be making very few errors already, and these extra words will allow for more development of their ideas. Of course, if you're in this position, do make sure to aim for error-free sentences and leave yourself plenty of time to check your answers. If writing more does lead to lower scores, you can always try producing slightly shorter essays with a greater focus on accuracy. Finally, it can be almost impossible to find out what you're doing right or wrong in your essays. Very few people are actually qualified to tell you, and unfortunately IELTS will not give you any indication of why you got the score you did. You need to find an expert teacher or editor, but please do be careful. I've looked around the internet and most of the people offering IELTS writing correction services wouldn't even be able to score band 7. This is something that I offer, and I've helped many people score band 7, 8, and even the seemingly impossible band 9. That's because I'm a native speaker of English with 15 years of experience as an editor and writer, and another 11 years of experience working as an IELTS tutor. That makes me uniquely qualified to help people find and change the mistakes in their essays. You can find information about that at my website, TED-IELTS.com. There's also loads of free materials there that you can use to help guide you towards IELTS success.